never thought my twilight years would be spent in a legal battle against my own flesh and blood. At 69, with arthritis claiming more of my joints each year, I should have been enjoying retirement, not clutching legal documents like shields against my own sons. My name is Margaret Whitfield. Margaret. I've lived in the same colonial-style home in Burlington, Vermont for 43 years, a home I built with my late husband Richard. We raised our boys here, Thomas and William, between these walls that now feel both like a sanctuary and a battleground. The day everything changed was unseasonably warm for October. I remember because I'd worn my light cardigan, the pale blue one Richard had given me for our 35th anniversary, just months before cancer took him. The weight of his absence still pressed on my chest 3 years later, a constant companion I'd learned to carry. I was tending to my garden when Thomas's black BMW pulled into the driveway, followed minutes later by William's Tesla. My sons rarely visited together unless it was a holiday, and Halloween was still weeks away. Something was amiss. "Mom," Thomas called, not bothering to help me up from my kneeling position among the chrysanthemums. At 54, my eldest had his father's height and my impatience. The corporate world had polished him into something hard and gleaming, successful by every measure except the ones that mattered to me. "We need to talk," William added, at least offering his hand. At 48, my younger son had always been the gentler of the two, though life had gradually chipped away at his compassion. The tech industry had given him wealth, but taken much of his humanity in return. Inside, I served them coffee in the Wedgwood cups that had belonged to my mother, the ones they never appreciated despite their history and value. Their eyes darted around the living room, assessing, calculating. "You can't manage this place anymore." "Mom," Thomas said without preamble, "it's too big. The stairs are dangerous at your age. The maintenance is—" "What your brother is trying to say," William interrupted, his voice honey over steel, "is that we're concerned. We found a wonderful assisted living facility, Sunrise Gardens. It's got everything: activities, medical staff, people your own age." I sipped my coffee slowly, feeling the familiar burn of betrayal. "I'm managing just fine, thank you." Thomas sighed the way he did when his children were being difficult. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is worth almost $1.2 million in today's market. That money would secure your care for the rest of your life, with plenty left over for—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "For your inheritance," I completed for him, setting my cup down with a finality that made both men shift in their seats. "That's not what this is about," William protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. "Isn't it?" I reached for my cane, not because I needed it just then, but because I wanted to remind them of my vulnerability, which they were so quick to exploit. "You boys haven't visited in 3 months. Thomas, you missed your own father's memorial service because of a critical business meeting. William, you stayed exactly 47 minutes at Christmas before rushing off to Aspen with Brittany. That's not fair." "Mom," William said, his voice rising, "we have lives, responsibilities." "And I'm one of them? A responsibility?" My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. "Let me be perfectly clear. This house stays with me until I decide otherwise. It's my name on the deed, mine and your father's." Thomas's jaw tightened. He'd always looked like Richard when he was angry. "We've already spoken to a real estate agent. Homes in this neighborhood aren't staying on the market for more than a week. We could close by the end of the month." The audacity stole my breath. "You did what?" "It's for your own good," William added quickly. "Dad would have wanted you to be taken care of." I laughed then, a sound so foreign to my own ears that it startled all 3 of us. "Don't you dare tell me what Richard would have wanted. You barely knew him. Too busy with your own lives to call, to visit." "That's not true," Thomas began. "When he was dying," I continued, my voice deadly quiet, "he asked to see you both. Every day for 3 weeks. You were always too busy. Until the reading of the will, of course. For that, you both managed to clear your schedules. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken accusations. "We're trying to help you, Mom," William finally said, his voice gentle but patronizing. I nodded slowly. "I know exactly what you're trying to do." I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the protest in my knees. "I have an appointment. You'll have to excuse me." "Mom, we're not finished discussing this," Thomas said, rising as well. "Oh, but we are." I reached for my handbag. "For now." After they left, Thomas with a warning that we'd revisit the conversation soon, William with an awkward hug that felt more like obligation than affection, I sat in Richard's old armchair and wept. Not for long, just enough to release the pressure that had built behind my ribs. Then I picked up the phone and called Eleanor Robertson. Eleanor and I had met in a grief support group after Richard died. She'd lost her husband 2 years before, and unlike my fair-weather friends who drifted away when faced with my sadness, Eleanor had waded right into the mess with me. At 71, she was also a retired attorney who specialized in elder law. "They're circling like vultures, Ellie," I told her after explaining the ambush. "It was only a matter of time," she replied, no surprise in her voice. "What do you want to do, Maggie?" I stared at the photograph on the mantel, Richard and me on our wedding day, young and radiant with hope. "I want to teach them a lesson they'll never forget." "Then let's get started," Eleanor said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Eleanor introduced me to her former colleague, Samuel Chen, who now specialized in estate planning. Together we devised a strategy that would protect me and hopefully shock my sons into recognizing what they were about to lose, not just financially, but in terms of family bonds that could never be replaced. I also made an appointment with Dr. Kavita Sharma for a complete physical and cognitive assessment. If my sons wanted to claim I was incapable of managing my affairs, I needed documentation proving otherwise. "Your blood pressure is a bit high today, Margaret," Dr. Sharma noted, "but given the circumstances, that's understandable. Otherwise, you're in excellent health for a woman of 69. Your cognitive function tests are well above average for your age group." I smiled grimly. "I want that in writing, please." "Of course," she said, patting my hand. And for what it's worth, my mother went through something similar with my brother. These family dynamics can be challenging. "That's one word for it," I replied. Armed with medical clearance and legal advice, I invited my sons to dinner the following Saturday. To my surprise, they both accepted without hesitation. Thomas even asked if he could bring wine. I spent the day cooking Richard's favorite meal, pot roast with root vegetables, crusty bread, and apple pie for dessert. The familiar rhythms of the kitchen soothed me, and as I worked, I found myself talking to Richard as if he was still there, leaning against the counter with his crossword puzzle. "You'd be so disappointed in them, Rich," I murmured as I peeled potatoes. "Where did we go wrong? Was it the private schools, the summer camps? Did we give them too much, or not enough of ourselves?" The house remained silent, offering no answers. They arrived separately again, Thomas 15 minutes early and William 10 minutes late. I watched from the window as they exchanged tense words in the driveway, before putting on identical masks of filial concern and entering my home. "Something smells wonderful, Mom," William said, presenting me with a bouquet of lilies that he must have known were my least favorite flower. Thomas handed over a bottle of expensive Cabernet. "I remembered how you and Dad used to enjoy a good red." I accepted their offerings with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "How thoughtful. Come in, everything's ready." The tension around the dining table was palpable, despite my son's efforts at casual conversation. They asked about my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the library, things they hadn't shown interest in for years. "So, Mom," Thomas finally said as I served the apple pie, "have you given any more thought to what we discussed?" I set the pie server down carefully. "You mean selling my home against my wishes and shipping me off to a facility where I'll be out of your way?" William winced. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I took a sip of water. "Let's cut to the chase, boys. You want money, my money, Richard's money, this house's money." Thomas had the decency to flush. "We want security for you. And yes, ultimately, there's the matter of inheritance. Dad built a significant estate, and proper planning is just good financial sense." "Your father did build a significant estate," I agreed. "And he was very specific about how it should be managed after his death." Something in my tone made them both sit up straighter. "What do you mean?" William asked cautiously. I rose from the table. "Wait here." In Richard's study, still preserved exactly as he left it, I unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I carried it back to the dining room. "Your father wasn't a fool," I said, retaking my seat. "He watched how you both changed as you grew more successful. How rarely you called. How you always seemed to need money for one venture or another. He loved you, but he wasn't blind to your flaws." I opened the envelope and removed several legal documents. 2 weeks before he died, Richard made some changes to his will and our estate plan. Changes I agreed with completely. Thomas reached for the papers. "What kind of changes?" I held them back. "He established a trust. The house, our investments, everything of significant value was placed in it. I'm the primary beneficiary during my lifetime." "And after?" William asked, his voice tight. "That depends entirely on you." I slid the papers across the table. "The remainder beneficiaries are potentially you two, equally. However, there are conditions." They leaned forward simultaneously. "First, the house cannot be sold while I'm alive unless I choose to sell it. Period. Any attempt to force or coerce me will result in immediate disqualification from inheritance." Thomas's face darkened. "That's ridiculous." "Second," I continued as if he hadn't spoken, "you are each required to demonstrate genuine care and concern for my well-being. This includes regular visits, not phone calls, actual in-person visits, at least twice monthly." William laughed nervously. "You can't legally enforce that." "Actually, he can and did." I tapped the document. "The trust includes a detailed visitation log requirement verified by a third-party trustee, Eleanor Robertson, who you might remember from your father's funeral. One of the few people who actually showed up." They exchanged glances. "There's more," I continued. "The trust includes a behavioral clause. Any attempt to undermine my independence, any disrespectful behavior, any actions that cause me emotional distress, all documented by either myself, Eleanor, or my physician, result in a percentage reduction of your inheritance." "This can't be legal," Thomas sputtered. "It is. Samuel Chen, one of the most respected estate attorneys in New England, made sure of it. He's also a co-trustee. So basically, we have to jump through hoops to get what's rightfully ours," William said bitterly. I felt a sharp pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my physical health. "Rightfully yours. You think you're entitled to the fruits of our labor. Your father worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years. I supported his career, raised you boys, volunteered in your schools, managed this household, and then took care of him through cancer. What exactly have you done to deserve any of it?" The silence that followed was deafening. "There's one more thing," I said, reaching back into the envelope. "A letter from your father to each of you. He asked that I give these to you only when necessary. I think that time has come." I handed them each a sealed envelope with their names written in Richard's distinctive handwriting. Thomas stared at his as if it might bite. William's hands shook as he accepted his. "Read them in private," I suggested, rising from the table. "I'll make coffee." In the kitchen, I braced myself against the counter, suddenly exhausted. I had rehearsed this confrontation countless times, but the reality was far more draining than I'd anticipated. The wounds were deeper, the disappointment more acute. When I returned with the coffee, Thomas was pacing by the window, his letter crumpled in his fist. William sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. Neither spoke as I set the tray down. "Dad knew," William finally whispered. "He knew we'd try to take the house." "He knew you'd forgotten what matters," I corrected gently. "Family, loyalty, love that doesn't come with conditions." Thomas turned from the window, his expression a complex mixture of anger and shame. "So that's it? We either play by your rules or we get nothing?" "Those aren't my rules, Thomas. They're your father's. And they aren't about control. They're about rebuilding what's broken between us." I poured coffee into 3 cups. "All Richard wanted, all I want, is for you to be the men we raised you to be. Men of character. Men who understand that wealth isn't measured only in dollars." "And if we refuse," he challenged, "then the trust provisions are clear. Everything goes to the charitable foundation Richard established, divided equally between cancer research and educational scholarships for disadvantaged children." William raised his head. "You'd really cut us off?" "No," I said softly. "You'd be cutting yourselves off. There would still be time to change course, to rebuild trust, to remember what family means. The choice would be yours." The remainder of the evening passed in uncomfortable silence. They left early, Thomas with barely a goodbye, William with a hesitant hug and a whispered, "I'm sorry," that felt more genuine than anything he'd said in years. After they were gone, I sat alone in the quiet house, wondering if I'd just lost my sons forever, or taken the first painful step toward genuine reconciliation. Either way, I had stood my ground. Richard would have been proud. The next morning, I was surprised to find Thomas's car in my driveway when I returned from my daily walk. He was sitting on the porch steps, looking rumpled and exhausted. "I couldn't sleep," he said as I approached. "Neither could I admitted, lowering myself to sit beside him despite the protest from my knees. "Dad's letter," he began, then stopped, clearing his throat. "He said he watched me become successful in business while failing at being human." Thomas laughed bitterly. Pretty accurate assessment. I said nothing, waiting. He reminded me of things I'd forgotten, how he taught me to ride a bike in this driveway. How you stayed up all night helping me with my science project when I procrastinated until the last minute. How you both came to every baseball game even though I was terrible and spent most seasons on the bench. He looked at his hands. He said the house wasn't just property. It was the physical embodiment of our family's story. "It is," I said simply. I've been so focused on the bottom line that I forgot what actually matters. Thomas turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm ashamed, Mom. Dad was right. I've become someone I don't recognize anymore. Someone who would try to force his own mother out of her home for financial gain." The admission hung in the air between us. "The real estate agent," I said after a moment. "Did you really contact one?" He nodded miserably. "I called her yesterday and canceled everything. Told her the house wasn't for sale, wouldn't be for sale. She seemed confused." I imagined she was. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Thomas continued. "I wouldn't, but I want to try to make things right, to be better, to be the son you and Dad deserved." I felt tears prickle behind my eyes. "That's all we ever wanted, Tommy." He hadn't let me call him that in 30 years, but today he didn't correct me. William's path to reconciliation was slower, more cautious. He called 3 days later, asking if he could come by on Sunday. When he arrived, he brought not flowers, but vegetable seedlings for my garden, tomatoes and peppers that would need nurturing through the summer months, a silent acknowledgement that he expected me to remain in my home, tending my garden for seasons to come. Over the following weeks and months, small changes accumulated like the first flakes of snow, gradual but eventually transforming the landscape. Thomas began stopping by on his way home from work, sometimes just for 15 minutes, sometimes staying for dinner. William started calling more regularly and visiting on weekends, often with questions about family recipes or stories about Richard that he wanted to preserve for his own children. There were still difficult moments. Old habits and attitudes didn't disappear overnight. Sometimes I caught them exchanging glances when I mentioned a home repair or a doctor's appointment. Their instinct to manage me still strong. But now they asked how they could help instead of making decisions for me. 6 months after our confrontation, we gathered in my living room, Eleanor, Samuel, Thomas, William, and I, for a formal review of the trust. My sons had met all the visitation requirements, and Eleanor reported no incidents that would trigger the behavioral clause reductions. "I'm impressed," Samuel said, reviewing his notes. "This is the most successful implementation of an ethical behavior clause I've ever overseen." "It shouldn't take legal documents to make family act like family," Thomas remarked. The irony of his statement not lost on any of us. "Sometimes we need structure to find our way back to what matters," Eleanor replied kindly. After the meeting, as we shared lunch around my dining table, I watched my sons interact with Eleanor and Samuel, respectful, engaged, asking thoughtful questions about elder law and estate planning, not for their benefit, but for mine. They were changing. We all were. Later, as twilight settled over the garden Richard and I had planted together decades ago, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, thinking about the journey we'd taken. The pain had been necessary, the confrontation unavoidable, but beyond the hurt, something new was growing, something that might actually be stronger than what came before, because it was built on truth rather than obligation. My phone buzzed with a text from William. "Just checking in. Tommy and I are planning Sunday dinner this week. We'll handle everything. Love you, Mom." I smiled and typed back, "Looking forward to it. Love you too." In the distance, I could see the first fireflies of the season beginning to flicker among the trees. Richard had always loved this time of evening, this time of year. I could almost feel him beside me on the porch swing, his presence a comfort rather than an absence. "We did good, Rich," I whispered to the gathering darkness. "They're finding their way back." And in the gentle evening breeze, I could almost hear his answer. "They always had it in them, Maggie. They just needed to remember." The house around me stood solid and welcoming, not just a structure of wood and stone, but a repository of memories, a testament to love that endured beyond death, beyond disappointment, beyond the failings we all carry as human beings. It would remain my home for as long as I needed it to be, and someday, when I was ready to join Richard, it would pass to sons who had learned to value it not for its market price, but for the priceless legacy it contained. Until then, I would continue to tend my garden, host Sunday dinners, create new memories within these cherished walls, and embrace each day as the gift it was. Not as a woman defeated by time and circumstances, but as the matriarch of a family that had nearly lost its way, but found its path back to what truly mattered. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Tentar novamente ou Claude pode cometer erros. Confira sempre as respostas.